Hello, everybody. Welcome to this webinar um, on negotiating with engagers for directors and choreographers. My name is Scott Bellis. I'm an equity member and a national counselor for equity, and I'm also the current council president. But more importantly, in this context, I'm a member of the Directing and Choreography Committee, which is the group that created the impetus for us to have this webinar. We're really glad that you've taken the time to join us today for this conversation. First of all, I'd like to begin with a land acknowledgement. I'm speaking to you from Vancouver, British Columbia, which is situated on the traditional unceded lands of the Squamish, the Tsleil-Waututh, and the Musqueam First Nations. Peoples of the Coast Salish Sea have been carrying and giving stewardship to the lands and waters of this region for time immemorial. I'm particularly encouraged and hopeful for the changes that I'm seeing and the empowerment that's coming back, especially for the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations people in this area. And I'd like to also continue here by reading a statement of affirmation, which is something that we read at all of our public events that we hold through the association. And it goes like this. Equity embraces an open and inclusive environment and encourages respectful behavior that affirms the dignity of all individuals. Equity further recognizes our shared responsibility for vigilance in creating and maintaining this environment. We also recognize a shared history with Indigenous, First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples in Canada. In honor of those who have gone before us, Equity commits to working toward understanding and actionable practices of reconciliation. Okay, so the Directing and Choreography Committee has been chatting for some time about what kinds of interesting activities and community building events we could hold to bring the community together for the artists who work in the disciplines of directing and choreography, and that also includes fight direction and intimacy direction. Those four disciplines are covered by the activities of this committee, and we've been talking for some time about how occupying those roles within the theater making process can often be lonely and can be sometimes a little daunting, and it can be challenging to find your community as you're pursuing those your work in those disciplines. So we decided to have a webinar and throw some ideas on the table to see how we could generate some conversations within our community about what it's like to pursue this work. So we decided that something that we would begin with would be negotiating with engagers, which is something that we all have to do when we take on these roles. And I'm very pleased to have the three panelists that we have with us today to explore this conversation. Let me introduce them to you now. Okay, first of all, we have Rebecca Northan. Hi, Rebecca. Rebecca is a troublemaker who is currently attempting to build a goblin empire with her shows Goblin Macbeth, Goblin Oedipus, and more goblin projects in the works. She acts, directs, writes, and produces. Thanks for being here, Rebecca. Next is Meg Roe. Meg's work as an actor, director, composer, sound designer, and a dramaturg has been seen across Canada at many theaters, more than I'm going to name, but a few of them include Crow's Theatre, the Shaw Festival, Soul Pepper, the Arts Club, the National Arts Center. I got about half of them in there. There's way more than that. Thank you, Meg, for being here. Last is Julie Tomaino. Julie is a theater director, a choreographer, and an educator based in Toronto. Julie works across the country as a director and choreographer, specializing in musical theater. Thank you all for being here. I'm just one more housekeeping thing. We will have time for some questions as we go through here. If you want to ask a question, either raise your hand or write your question in the Q&A section, not in the chat section. The chat is a little harder to follow because sometimes other kind of comments and general conversation goes in there. It's great to say hello there, though. So yeah, if you have a question, please put it in the Q&A and we'll try to get to it in the time we have. Okay, let's begin. Okay, so you've been offered a contract. Now you have some things to consider. I want to explore this from two angles. One is the angle of how do you have conversations with engagers about the things you need for your production? You know, how do you need to allot resources? What kinds of specialty things do you need to ask for that may be specific for the kind of show that you're doing? That kind of thing. And then later on, after we kind of dig through that a little bit, I'd like to talk about how do you have conversations with engagers about the things that you need for you as the artist at work in these workplaces. So there's kind of the two angles. There's kind of the global angle, and then there's the more personal. So do any of you wish to start us off with what's something that you've had to ask for or you've wanted to ask for in a production that you've had to have a conversation with the engager, something unusual or something that you feel was you really needed to ask for in order to make your production work? Would anybody care to jump in first? I can also pick somebody. Yeah, here's some hands. That's great. Rebecca, I saw your hand first. Why don't you jump in?
Thanks for having me. In terms of something I asked for really recently, where I had to talk to an artistic director and say, look, I really, really need these things. I really needed 3 chicken puppets.
Okay.
And I needed them.
How was that? How was that request received?
I mean, I think maybe from me that those kind of requests, people are like, yeah, okay, like that's not really surprising. But in particular, so I'm going to go and direct a production of Charlotte's Web at Alberta Theatre Projects in November. And I think that it was sort of the discussing the cost of the puppets, justifying the puppets. Why are we buying the puppets well in advance? And for me as the director saying, you know, I have a really short rehearsal period and I need the puppets on the first day of rehearsal. And I'm going to have the actors perform in half masks. So then also adding to that request of saying, I'm going to need half masks on the first day of rehearsal, like completed, finished, ready to hit the deck for opening night on the first day of rehearsal. And that's, you know, an important conversation to front load just because it kicks in, you know, like, are the props people working? Do I know the props people? Are they going to build the kind of masks that I want? Like, it kind of sets off a whole bunch of other things. So, and it was well received, and they have a new production manager there who's great and who did a bunch of research and found some resources. I mean, when it came to the chicken puppets, I said, look, I don't want to I will buy the chicken puppets if you want, and you can rent them from me, but I will own the chicken puppets afterwards. Though I'll use them forever. But they found the money. So in a way, sadly, I won't own the chicken puppets.
Great. Good. Julie.
I'm going to say 3 things, like consultants or professionals, like specialists, follow spots, and costume pieces. So professionals like intimacy director or a fight director or a dialect coach or a a specific cultural dialect coach, in particular when I did Margaritaville, there was both Caribbean accents and various other accents, and the accent coach that we, or the dialect coach we had on the production, was not qualified to do the Caribbean accents, so she recommended another person. So that was a conversation. And then follow spots, surprisingly, at a couple different theaters, it's not, you're not, it's not assumed that you're going to need follow spots. So I've both negotiated 2 follow spots before, and 1 follow spot / fly person that they run back and forth. So the lighting designer and I have to have conversations on when the flyers are coming in and when we can and can't use follow spots. And then I've also been a choreographer on a production where a follow spot was cut in order to, where follow spots completely were cut in order to afford another out of town actor. And the other one is costume pieces. And this is just, I've negotiated for costume pieces on the first day, if they're, or not the first day necessarily for musicals, but like the 3rd day or whenever we start staging, so that if there's a specialty quick change on stage, that we can start rehearsing that right away.
Okay,
So
that's
those
great.
are not unique necessarily, but those are things that
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. And Meg?
I don't think I've ever directed a show that didn't require some elaborate conversation about a specific need that I thought the show needed, and all sorts of different, like, rehearsal process changes, timing changes, calendar changes, production schedule changes. I lopped a chunk of the entire production budget off and created a technical residency week 6 months in advance of the rehearsal process starting. Even like script changes, like the capacity to make changes to a script and the support of the producers in doing that, either affording the writing or willing to take the risk. And yeah, on deck crewing all the time. I'm so delighted you got a follow spot in your life. That's amazing. We should just have a webinar on how to get that. Yeah, having, for example, if you've decided as a team, including the producer, that you're going to do a ton of quick changes, but you only have 1 assistant stage manager on deck, you don't have a wardrobe person on deck, that can really hinder your process. So negotiating and navigating how to add technical personnel to make a show possible, a sound op who can manage labs in the house, mixing properly in a straight play where you wouldn't normally have labs, and looking at a budget in order to kind of facilitate that and know how to restructure things so that you can get what you feel that you need. I've done that on every show. Yeah, a real
Can you
pain.
talk a little bit more, Meg, about what you were, when you said you carved out some of the rehearsal period to have a technical residency, I think. Can you talk a little bit
Yeah,
more
so
about what
it
that
wasn't
structure
just the rehearsal period. It was like in conversation with the production manager, we just looked at the overall budget and cut off a big chunk of off the top and restructured it so that we could do, I think, almost a full week in a theater with a video design, sound designers, technicians to operate, a stagehand to make changes, set changes that we wanted to try, kind of mocking stuff up. And we were able to experiment with all the ideas we had floating in our head, things that would be impossible to achieve in a tech, like the try and fail that you need to do to make something highly technical successful. We just restructured everything. So everybody lost a little bit of money, but we put it at the front end, and it was great. It made a huge difference for that show, which had multiple projectors and yeah, massive sound stuff and big, yeah, bold set design and all sorts of things that we were able to do a lot of stuff because of that week. So it was worthwhile to take the overall budget down in order to make it happen.
Yeah, that's great. So I've noted that I think all 3 of you have sort of mentioned. I'm just grabbing like thematic things that are coming out of the things you're sharing with us. But you've all mentioned something like getting things ahead of time, and I think we're all really conscious in the theater making process about how time is always such a crunch. I'm just wondering, how do those conversations generally go for you when you're having those discussions with the production team or with the engager, when you're asking for things ahead of time? Because it puts extra pressure on them too. So I'm just wondering, what's the landscape like out there for those kinds of requests, and how do you navigate it when you encounter some difficulties or resistance? Meg, I saw your hand up. Go ahead.
Well, I mean, I'd argue the opposite, actually. I think it takes pressure off of everybody to have conversations well in advance. And I think there's sometimes a misunderstanding that I think the bulk of the work of the director happens months and months and months in advance of rehearsal starting. I think rehearsal starting is the last step, actually. And if you haven't baked the cake by the time you get there, you're going to be in trouble. So that kind of prep, that really investigative prep that gets you into the piece and what you think you want, what you need, bringing that to the table early on is good for everybody, and it takes the pressure off. It helps. I feel like we live in a negotiable industry. That's the point of it. It's not actually a problem to negotiate. It's useful. It's collaborative. It's how you make stuff happen. And the idea that the producer and the director are somehow on opposite sides is usually the least useful way to proceed, right? The best way to proceed is you're in this together. You both want to make a play in a swimming pool. How do you make that happen? You have to find the pool and who can swim, and do you need nose plugs? Like all that stuff needs to happen way in advance of rehearsals beginning. So I think the earlier you have those conversations, the more successful they'll be, and the more you'll find out. And sometimes the limitations that a producer might bring to the table can be really useful. Yeah, you wanted a swimming pool, but you can't get it, so you're doing a bucket, and the bucket's more interesting anyway. And all of that has to happen, a year out. You want to try to make those conversations begin as soon as possible, so that you're in collaboration from the start and you're not chasing one another.
Yeah, that's really great. Thank you very much. Go ahead, Julie.
Yeah, like that was a great answer, Meg. I was nodding along. I also think that like if you're just once you know what play you're directing or musical or whatever, like immediately I start to like envision, read the script obviously, and think about all of those things, and then the conversations start right after that. And as well informed as you can be, like the arguments or the conversations that you need, the whys that why you need these things are like because they're so supported by all of the things that you've thought about. I think they just become no-brainers. Like they become easy because your arguments are so solid because you know exactly why you need the things that you need. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Great. Did you want to add anything in, Rebecca, in terms of conversations you're having with engagers about various requests? And
I suppose what I would sort of piggyback onto, with both Julie and Meg saying the earlier you have the conversation, the better. My experience has been in speaking with producers and the production teams is that actually that there's excitement about trying to creative problem solve, and really kind of like launching your needs in a way as a great creative challenge tends, in my experience, to get people excited, so that there's buy-in to the why of it long before a budget gets looked at. And then as Meg mentioned as well, of like having a look at the budget and bringing your creative mind to the budget itself and going, okay, well, it's always done this way, but circling items, so you're like, I have a question about like, what's this like $1,200 in photocopying? Like, are we really going to do $1,200, or could we like grab $800 here and $800 there?
okay,
Yeah, I think just bringing
thank you very much.
creativity with you at all time, I think is people tend to respond to it.
While we're on this topic, I'm just going to look at the Q&A here for a second. And Catriona has put into the Q&A, I'd love to hear your advice to our emerging directors, those who might say, well, these are all very established artists. I don't have the clout to negotiate that kind of thing. does any of you have a response you'd care to offer?
Yeah, I
Meg,
mean,
please.
I'd go back to my first point, which is that it's a negotiated industry. Like you do, in fact, have the clout to negotiate that. And I think I'd offer a real sense of empowerment that if you've been chosen or you've pitched and been picked or been hired or been brought in to direct something, the whole reason the producer wants you there is for like that input and negotiating kind of power. I think there will be things that you may need to prove you can use before you're given. And that's kind of a shitty truth, frankly. You might not get the pyrotechnic waterfall in the first, your first
Yeah.
ever gig. You might need to show that you won't cut the pyrotechnic waterfall after the second preview. So there's some of that kind of, experiential stuff and experience building stuff that you might need to do. But I'd offer the opposite, in fact, that if you've been hired, say it's your first ever gig and you're heading over to Stratford to work on the festival stage, like they want to know what you want to do. And they want to make it happen for you as much as they can. And they want to support you. They want you to win. So taking in that sense of empowerment and artistic offer and creativity and collaboration is how you'll get it and how you'll learn how to push the limit further the next time, or that's kind of the game. And
Yeah.
it's not you mustn't be frightened of it. Actually, it's the whole thing. It's great.
That's fantastic. Yes, please, Rebecca.
I was going to say that like a guiding principle of my entire career, whether it be as an actor, producer, director, whatever, is my mantra is the worst that anyone's going to say to me is no. I mean, I don't know, maybe behind your back, maybe they say way worse things, but whatever. You just ask. You just ask. You ask, and sometimes you ask for what might seem like an outrageous thing. And then you may be shocked when they say yes. So, be ready to use the outrageous thing, whatever that happens to be. But and I love, Meg, that you referred to it as a game. Because it's a high stakes game where we're all trying to make a living as artists, but also, maintaining a sense of play and going, oh, I'm just going to take the risk to ask. Even as a first-time director, I think is kind of thrilling, and that you should just go for it, for sure.
Oh, that's great. Thank you very much. Yes, Julie, go ahead.
Two things. I have asked for projections in every single show I ever do, and I get them 10% of the time. Just know that sometimes the answer is actually no, because they can't afford the projection designer or the time within the production schedule or whatever. But I continue to ask for projections every show that I ever do. And the other thing that I like, just an example, is a reading I did at Sheridan College. I wanted to stage it a little bit, and I knew that they had mic stands and music stands and mics like on stands, not lavs. So I went in and asked for lavs because I was like, okay, this is what I want, but I knew they weren't going to give it to me, but I just asked anyways. I was like, tell me why I can't have lavs again. And they told me why. And then I was like, can we just, okay. Can we stage so that actors can move around to various stands and don't have to stay at their stand the entire time? So basically, can we, the sound mixer, I don't actually know what happens on that side, but can we do it where this actor A also uses actor B's mic sometimes and actor C's mic sometimes, whatever? And they said yes. And I think they said yes because I asked for lavs, and they were already like, oh, I didn't give her lavs, so we have to give her this, I don't know that necessarily was the exact reason, but that's sort of a way to get some things too, is ask for more than you actually want. Just expect
Very
to
good. Yeah. Go ahead, Rebecca. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say another thing that I think is very useful is to educate yourself on the possible cost of what it is that you're asking for, so that you know that going into a meeting, right? So in the example of the chicken puppets, I spent 10 days researching where I could get pre-made chicken puppets that looked like what I wanted, et cetera, and then was able to say, look, I found 3 sources. Here they are. Here's the most expensive one, the medium one, and the low budget one. And actually, I'm kind of leaning towards the low budget one, surprisingly enough. And so, that's the reason then when early in the conversation, Julie mentioned that she had a show with not just one spotlight, but two, that Meg and I were like going, oh my God, because clearly the three of us as directors have asked for spotlights, and some fantastic production manager has gone, let me talk to you about the cost of what a spotlight kicks in. And you go, oh, but all the movies about theater shows, they all have spotlights. That seems essential. And you're like, okay. So it really behooves you to do your own research and not be passive and go, okay, here's a thing I want, but I have no idea. And you sort of dump that into the lap of the technical director, the production manager. Is research it as though you're spending your own money, even though you're not. But like, think of it as it's your own money and go, okay, well then, if it was me paying for the chicken puppets, would I? Yes, I would. Yes, I would. And then the other thing is when you hear the no, because you're going to hear the no. You ask for projections 100% of the time. You only get a yes 10% of the time. Well, rather than don't be defeated by that, but that actually great creativity comes out of the no. You can't have the swimming pool, you get the bucket. Woo, okay. And then rise to that challenge creatively as a director so that you're getting inspired rather than feeling defeated or building up resentment that, oh, this theater company said no to my brilliant idea. We just can't say yes to all the ideas. Someone in the improv world spread a horrible rumor that yes and is the rule of everything, and it sure is not. That's another seminar for another day.
Okay.
Can I piggyback on Rebecca's research
Sure.
point and just say that in addition to the kind of exterior research you want to do, what stuff costs, and the interior play-based, script-based, process-based research that you want to do before you ask for the swimming pool or the bucket is super important. That if you're asking for a follow spot, and that comes with an IATSE technician who's there for the entire run, that's a massive expenditure for the company. And you want to know why. Why do you want that person? And how are you going to use them appropriately? You can't discover the why in the tech. And you don't want to have a company pay the money for that human, that amazing human, which is, I'm shocked. The best thing that's come out so far that Julie got a follow spot. That if you only use that person one time in a show, and that moment isn't spectacular, you may not get the follow spot the next time you ask. You need to have these kind of expensive choices or outside the template budget choices investigated, and you need to know the value of them in your show, frankly. And you want to sort of prove to yourself first, yes, I do need a video designer, and this is why. Yes, I do need a live musician on stage. Yes, I do need a chicken puppet, and here are the reasons why. And then that's how you know how to turn the swimming pool into a bucket, because you know what the water means. So it won't matter if it's a glass or a bucket or a pool. It's crummy not to get the pool, but you can make it work. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. I'm just going to take a question from the Q&A here. It's kind of related to, visioning your production. How do you go about, this is from Suchita, how do you go about thinking about your requests when a script isn't yet available? Thinking about productions with an element of devising where the script is very much in the ether. As a director or choreographer, how are you thinking about stuff that's going to be coming together more in the room, and how do you approach your prep and discussions with engagers about those kinds of productions? Does anybody have anything they'd like to offer? Yeah.
I just did a new work just this last year, a premiere. I think your main request is going to be time and capacity for change. That's going to be your biggest ask on a new work. I would guess that there will be some kind of script available or some kind of outline available before you go into a real production conversation. So you'll have some sense of what it is you think the show needs. But what I would take is a capacity to change your mind that you wouldn't need in the Tennessee Williams that you're doing, at the Arts Club next year. That's because the script will change, the production has to be able to change with it, and you can't be glued ideas and concepts the way you would be with a fixed piece. So time is what you're asking for more than anything else. And the goodwill and collaborative partnership of the producer to be with you on that, make sure you're on the same page that way. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Yes, Rebecca.
I would also say, in addition to time, as much as you're able to on a new or devised work, or the work that I've been doing in the last 10 years is a hybrid between highly structured theater and improvisation. And so I've learned over the last 10 years what it is that the work I create has the potential to, for example, stress the crew because it's out of the box in terms of how things function, is as much as you can try to anticipate that, of going like, okay, what normally happens in a script, in the Tennessee Williams, how does it unfold? We all kind of have a pretty good sense of that structure and that production schedule. And then how will the things that we think are going to come up in the show possibly stress the crew or stress the box office, or, stress, I just mean be sort of outside of what we're all used to. And so, for example, in the world of box office, I know that the shows that I do come with lots of phone calls from audience members who want to see the show, but they're really sort of afraid because they don't want to get picked to come on stage. So in anticipation of that, I've created what I call a box office primer. That's like, here's all the fear-based questions you're probably going to get from potential ticket buyers. And you go, look, I made this for you in advance. And so then everyone inside the organization starts to understand that you're thinking about them. You're trying to look out for them as best you can in the middle of devising this new thing. But that can be helpful, I think. It is anticipating upset.
Anticipation. Okay, good, thanks. We've got a question from Ryan here, which is really interesting. If you're a director who is represented by an agent, can any creative things or needs be negotiated by your agent, or are they only more for your own personal contract needs? Julie.
I've never gone through my agent for these kind of conversations because they're going to listen to, I just can explain it better. I can just talk to the theater more clearly and more specifically about like whatever need it is. I can't even think of an example where I've asked for something through my agent. Mostly money, like if I have to leave early or things like that, like I'll negotiate through my agent. But this kind of stuff, like I just feel like I've always personally loved having the direct conversation with the production manager, the TD, or the artistic director, or all of them, because I can talk about my work more clearly and more specifically than my agent can,
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, anyone else have an offer in response? Yeah, Meg, please.
Yeah, I mean, I use my agent. I don't use my agent for all my directing contracts. The bigger the machine, the more I use them. Because there are relationships I have that I'm more confident in negotiating those contracts, and then ones where I need to be the squeaky wheel in a way that I just don't want to do. But I would say I use my agent so I can have this conversation about my artistic needs in the process. So it would be pretty uncommon and unusual to discuss any kind of budget or artistic concerns through your agent, but you might get into scheduling through your agent. I could see that happening with, say, if you were going to one of the big festivals, you might get into how the rehearsal process is set out or how your production tech schedule looks, some of that calendar stuff. But I think I would perceive it as I use her so that I can ask for the swimming pool, and all of that is done, and none of that's in my way to have an artistic conversation. And then I just feel the same way, but it's me with a smaller company where I'm negotiating my contract myself. It'd be the same thing to get that stuff through, travel, let's say, and then because I want to actually get to the follow spot.
Right, great. This is actually a pretty good segue into moving the conversation more towards what our our personal needs are as artists, in our work, and what we're looking for from engagers in terms of supplying us with the things we need to do our work well, personally. So I'm just wondering if any of you would care to share anything about your experiences, about things you've asked for in relation to your own personal contract working at a theater. Just so we can get a sense of what it's like having those conversations with engagers when you're asking for something that's maybe not normally attached to a contract, or something that you're trying to get that's above the minimum that's required in those contracts. Anybody care to offer something? Yes, Julie.
I've asked for rental cars before. I've asked for just specifically like for specific reasons, like leaving a couple days before opening, arriving a couple days late. I don't like to do that, especially as a director. More as a choreographer, I feel a little bit more okay with it, I don't like to do that, but like sometimes like contracts just don't line up the way you want them to. Um, I've, yeah, and more money, obviously,
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, good. Yes, thank you. Rebecca.
Um, this is another area where I actually especially like really love working with my agent on the business side of things. I love my agent always. He's my longest term grown-up relationship. Um, it is bringing creativity to the negotiating process. So to me, anything inside of the contract is business, like it's the business part of show business that does not exclude creativity. So I have a personal thing that if it's first time that I'm working for a company, I don't really push to negotiate on the fee. Like we always ask, but whatever, it's the first time, we don't really know each other. And then I start going like, okay, well, where else can we, in a way, grab value? Like if we can't up the weekly fee, then what else you got? Can I have a percentage of your bar sales? I've asked for that not when I'm a hired gun director, but we have certainly asked for that when we're being presented and like selling a full production that says we can't quite come up to your weekly fee. And we go like, okay, great. I'm going to start looking for little pockets of money and I'm going to try to get my hands on it. And so then what else has value? Can I get a rental car? Because you don't know if a theater company like has a deal or a partnership. Can I get a gym membership for while I'm around? How many comps can I have? Can I have 10 comps for opening night? Yes. Can I have 20? You certainly gotta, in the world of negotiating, gotta like push and see like what are their limits. And again, like ask for outrageous things. What if they say yes? I mean, and like always do with I think a twinkle in your eye and a bit of a sense of humor. Like my agent and I always talk about, and we say this to people when we're negotiating with them, we are always looking for a win-win. We do not want to compromise on one side of the equation or other that builds up any kind of resentment if we can avoid it. So you go, okay, don't pay the weekly fee that I wanted $5,000 extra. Give me more comps. I don't know, make my name bigger on the poster. If you can, I don't really care about stuff like that, but my agent will always ask, like, do you want me to try to get your name above the title? I'm like, no, I don't. But again, you can ask for just about anything, really.
Yeah.
What did I think I read this recently? Maybe it was in the thing on the equity hand, like getting lunch delivered. Is that in the note, like possible notes for directors? Like what? Like not that the theater necessarily has to pay for your lunch. Maybe there's a place that but because there's so much going on and you don't have time, like, so it's really get creative. And so recently in the world of that sort of creativity, a theater was like, we're going to house you at such and such a place. And I went, I don't actually like walking through the area of the downtown where that hotel is. It actually increasingly makes me uncomfortable. So I've found another hotel, but it's slightly more than their budget. So we kind of went back and forth. They were like, they can't pay. So I said, what's the cost difference between where you would have housed me and this other place? $800. I was like, okay, I'll cover the $800. However, my request is I'm going to donate $800 to your theater and I want a tax receipt for it. And then I want you to take that $800 and top up my hotel. And they were like, oh, no one's ever asked for that. Yeah, they're going to look into it and go, oh, yeah, that's right, because we can accept donations. Yeah. So again, like, get creative so that at the end of the day, like, you feel like there's value on the plate that you've negotiated.
That's great. Thank you. Who haven't we
Yeah.
heard from? Meg, did you have something?
Yeah, all those things, like all the things that's all negotiable. It's all okay to talk about. If you don't get it, it's not personal. And if you do, it's also not personal necessarily. It's just business. I've negotiated travel, housing is a big thing for me. I really like knowing where I'm going to stay. I have a kind of rate now that just regardless of the size of the theater, I just can't do it for less than, which has sometimes been a real stumbling block with projects. But if it's a 6-week gig away or a 4-week gig away, there's kind of a kind of amount of money that I need to bring home for my family. I've negotiated my kids to come, housing for my kids, childcare stipends for my kids. Because if I'm with you 6 days a week, and let's be frank, 8 days out of 7 days a week in terms of time, I'm not with them and someone needs to be with them. I've changed my fee schedule since COVID. I negotiate 50% up front, and then the second to the last 25 and 25 either weekly or first day of rehearsal, first day of tech, because the work is done by the time I get to that point. I don't want to get an envelope on opening night with my nice dress with no pockets. I want to know that the work is being remunerated as I am doing it. So those things I've changed, and I wiggle around, depending on the company, my relationship with the company, the sureness I have that I'll be back, all those things kind of adjust that negotiation drive, let's say. But all those things are on the table. Designers, I want to pick the designers. Sometimes even more than casting, I would say. I'm fussier about my collaborative team. But everything's on the table. And I don't think and again, I wouldn't say there's no animosity in it, actually. It's a relationship. It's like you're on a date. It's like a really healthy Tinder. You've like set up what you want for both of you, and you're meeting in the middle. And yeah, it's all up for grabs.
Yeah. Did you have something you wanted to add there, Rebecca?
Well, Meg got to it, which was all I wanted to say was that really you hope that you are beginning a long-term relationship with a company. And so you really think about it as a date. I think that's a really healthy way to go about it.
I'm really glad to hear the phrase "everything is up for negotiation." I think sometimes we tend to forget as members that everything that's in our agreements and our contracts that we supply for our members working in theater is that everything in there is a minimum, that everything is up to be considered for a higher standard, to get a little more, to get something extra. It's the quid pro quo that we own as self-employed artists trying to make a living in a very precarious ecology. And I think it's just great to have that kind of mindset, to carry that with you all the time, not only as a director and choreographer, but as any member working in any discipline within our association. So it's really great to have that in the air and in this conversation.
I think that's reciprocal. Hey, Scott, like I think the producer could similarly talk to you about things they're looking for, what they need, what they're wanting. Like it is a relationship. I don't think we're trying to get something they're not trying to give. Actually, I think
no, I hear that. They're
giving like as much as they can, and you're actually looking at just the creative way of sculpting that much into something that works for both of you.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting as an association that provides collective bargaining agreements for our members working in these places. It's also important to remember that anything extra that happens above that is actually a collaboration between both parties that's directed about, it's directed towards the work and getting the special things that you need to get the work done. I got a couple of interesting questions here. Well, actually, first I'll take this one from Donna. For any kind of new works, what kind, if any, what kind of royalty discussions do you have? Have any of you ever had extra kind of discussions about royalty payments or residual payments for your work on the stage?
I've had I've worked on new works, and I've always tried to at least get first right of refusal if it goes on. I've never really been successful with that though, you know? So, and I don't know, I need to have more conversations about how to get more um how to, but I'm always feeling like, and this is a vulnerability for me, I'm always feeling like I need to contribute to this, to the project, in order to prove that I'm still worthy of directing it, you know? And I would love to get to a place where I'm like, okay, I have contributed. I am a solid contributor to this project. You need me on this project. So can we sign something that says I am on this project until we collectively decide that we're separating, you know? I haven't been successful with that yet. I haven't worked a lot on new musicals, but I have worked on a couple, and I haven't gotten those things at all.
Gotcha. Yeah. Thanks. Anybody else? I mean, Rebecca, you do a lot of devised work.
Yeah.
I mean, do you have conversations with engagers about that kind of thing, about royalties as shows go on?
Yeah, I mean, um, we always take a standard playwrights royalty off of the box office.
Mhm.
But so we know in Canada, you know, the playwrights royalty is 10%. But that is what I learned dealing with a New York producer was like, that doesn't happen in New York. This was like getting a master's degree in theater business, working with a New York producer. It was like, you'll get 10% of the profit pool. And I was like, 2% of the profit pool? Can I see the budget? Profit pool? What's the $1,200 of photocopying? That's going to take money out of the profit pool. It's very easy to have a show no profit while all kinds of money goes into other people's pockets. You know, but that was an instance where it was like, well, we want 2% of top of box office. Well, New York producers go, ha, 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 no.
Yeah.
Just don't come to New York. So, you know, but that's such a weird thing. And, you know, like I would, yeah, anyway. But otherwise, royalty wise, like we ask for what is standard. We really do. And that's just 10% of the box office. But certainly as a director working on somebody else's new work, only once did it occur to me, like I should probably ask for a percentage here, since the nugget of a script that came on the first day was not usable and had to be completely sort of torn apart and put together. And so it was like, I slid, as we sometimes do in new stuff, I kind of slid sideways into co-writer and dramaturg and director. But in that instance, it was such a small, sweet show that I just said, ah, you know, the lovely creator performer said, do you want to and I was like, you don't want to involve me in that because I will be a cutthroat business person and I'm going to take 50%, like at least 50%. So forget it. And the show has since gone on and been produced many times. And I have to just like celebrate in my little heart of like, oh, that's so great. That's so great. And have no resentment about it. Like there just can't, life is too short to hold on, like negotiate a nugget of resentment if you can avoid it. So, but I think
No
it's tricky in the
negotiating
new work area.
nuggets of resentment. Okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you.
It's super
Yeah, yeah.
tricky. It's very tricky and worth tiptoeing through because playwrights have the least security, I think. You know, they're putting a lot up front for not a lot. It's hard to be playwright. But I'd also say that in Canada, we've centered the playwright a lot, and sometimes to the detriment of collaborative artists working on a new piece. And I would include designers in that, not just the director, and actors as well, contributing to something. And then that piece centering around a single voice, the playwright. I think that is something worth talking about openly. And we don't have a great mechanism for that right now. I have negotiated points on a new work, 2% of future revenue on a piece that I worked as a director dramaturg on. And but the relationship between those writers and I was really close. It was easy to do. It would be difficult, I think, to how you structure that as a negotiating point is really interesting. It would be tricky. I would use an agent, frankly, if I thought there was real money involved with something I was working on, if I thought there was a future that would have money attached, like, let's be frank, actual money that's worth starting the conversation, I would use an agent, just for the practical reason of that's a business conversation, and points on the back end of something is difficult to talk about. But I think internally, what Rebecca's talking in terms of not holding resentment or a grudge about, you contribute to a work. There's just no way that you don't. If you're working on something new and you're leading it and you're taking a stab at it, you're going to change that piece, the way it flows and the structure of it often. So you have to kind of, I think there's a generosity of spirit. It's a tiny country. There's only 10 of it. Well, there's 41 of us, the 41 of us on this call. That, like, that's it. So if Julie writes a show and I help her out and then I'm an asshole about it, like, I don't know, Rebecca's not going to hire me the next time. There is a kind of give and take, and I think a generosity of spirit that we need to. So that's tricky, Donna.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. So we're kind of coming down to the end of the question. I've got a couple more here that have been submitted, but if anybody attending has anything they'd like to post, please feel free to put it in the Q&A. Here's one from Heather. Wondering what theaters have done to make you feel most welcome and taken care of, especially when you're working out of town. We've talked about hotels a little bit, but I'm just wondering if anybody has any experiences or observations they'd like to share. Yeah, Meg, please.
You know what's the most useful, actually? I mean, where you live and wanting to walk home safely, let's take that as read. It's actually understanding the structure of the company. If you've never worked there, like, who is in the office? How does it work? What's the reporting system? Does the production manager have an assistant and are you going to go through them the whole time? Do you have a technical director assigned to your space? Do you, like, sometimes the morass of a company and the way it operates in its office can be so difficult because you just don't, you arrive, you're ostensibly in charge, and you don't know anything. You don't even know where the bathrooms are. Sometimes, like, a solid handbook is very useful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Rebecca.
Yeah, I've worked at some companies that have amazing handbooks for the actors. Amazing handbooks, nothing for the director. And so I think that again, piggybacking on Meg, is, I don't even know how you do this, but figuring out the culture of the company that you're going into, because I think that we make an assumption in Canada that the culture of every company is pretty much the same, right? We're all putting on plays and we all hope it goes well, and so it's the same everywhere, and it really I think is not. So but aside from the of, like, what's made me feel really taken care of is just really, like, great open communication and getting a sense that everybody in the office knows who I am, is curious about what my needs are, asks questions, like asks open-ended questions, doesn't make assumptions, connects with you like a human being. I've had the great pleasure of actually being, I'm going to use this as a verb, artistic directed by some great people across the country where you do feel really lonely as a director, right? And you have your design team that you're sort of checking in with, but when the artistic director or the associate artistic directors really take the time to show up a couple of times a week and, offer their thoughts and their notes and whatever, like, then you feel less lonely. You feel way less lonely. And that's super helpful.
Yeah, please, Julie, go ahead.
Yeah, I would agree, Rebecca. And further, like I was at a theater this year where the artistic director wasn't in town, and she still made me feel very taken care of because she got the room run sent to her, videotaped and sent to her. She offered me notes like the next day, and then she got the invited dress rehearsal taped and sent to her, and she offered me notes the next day, and then she followed up with a phone call so we could actually discuss things. And she was just like, even though she was off doing a project of her own, I still felt so supported by her and the rest of the company. So those are the little things that just can make the most humongous difference.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you very much. Here's a question from Donna. How do you negotiate casting that is presented to you by the theater rather than when you cast the show yourself? I see some hands for that one. That's great. Go ahead, Meg.
Well, that's a tricky one. You could put it in the hard negotiation, say through your agent or as a part of your contract. You could put it in the soft side, like, can I get the swimming pool? I think it's a prep thing. If you know that the only person you can do that show with is Scott Bellis, then put it up front and make sure that's what you get. I think it's important to remember, particularly when you're looking at big rep companies, like say the big festivals or somewhere like Bard on the beach. There's the mathematics of a rep company and how it all fits together. You cannot probably be a part of the whole casting process. You won't have control necessarily over a whole company. But I'd offer that some of the best artistic experiences I have had are where a cast was handed to me. I've never had more fun with a company than when I didn't choose the cast. And I think it's something about control. It's something about allowance and acceptance and trust that the company these producers have built are beautiful performers that you'll be lucky to work with, so it's just it's a gray area, I'd say, worth kind of exploring in yourself before you accept the contract. How much control do you want over that? And again, why? If it's a person who's out of town, for example, that might be something you need to find money in the budget for. That might mean you don't get wigs in your show because you're going to bring Scott in. That all of that, I would just do that exploration up front. But I'd offer that truly some of the most beautiful experiences I've had with actors are people I didn't pick.
Cool, great. Yeah, Rebecca.
Yeah, I think it's being open and curious and excited about someone that you don't know. And as Meg said, trusting the company that's suggesting it to you. And also depending on the size of the company, trusting the casting director, who might be in-house casting director, who it's their job to like know everybody across the country. So I think there's also a part of, if not just if you have very specific actors in your own mind going in, maybe you don't, but you have a particular taste, or that the production that you're working on requires them to be excellent classically trained actors and have clown. Like that suddenly really narrows the field to a certain extent. And I think also in part looking towards upfront offered actors with a little bit of gratitude, in the sense that I just got sort of walloped this season. This had never happened to me before, but submissions closed for a show I'm going to work on, and the casting director said, so just to let you know, we've had 1,600 submissions for 6 roles. And I'm pretty sure I started to cry a little bit, because I thought, I don't have time to look through 1,600 submissions. I don't want to crush anybody's dreams. What? Right. And so then God bless the casting person was like, no, don't worry. Like we're starting to see those numbers now. That's getting to be kind of 800 and above, 1,500 and above submissions. And that the casting person was like, I'm going to narrow that down based on the conversations we've had and your needs, etc. I'm going to narrow that down to 400, and then we'll go through 400 together. And then you go like, sorry, who were the one or two actors that you just wanted me to cast? Let's start. Yes, let's go ahead with those folks. Like that's a sort of frustrating overwhelm of where we're at right now. I think in the world of digital submissions that we can kind of see those kinds of numbers now. Because my gosh, you can, it's not like when I started out where you were like, this headshot costs me $6 plus photocopying plus $2.15 to mail. Do I want to mail this to that theater or do I want lunch today? It's different.
It's different. It's a whole different ball game. Now, did you have anything you wanted to add, Julie? I mean, as a choreographer, obviously you're often working with people who you don't have a say in, or maybe you have some say, or how do you work? How do you
like
work
as
that?
a choreographer, when I'm collaborating with a director, like I don't have much say. Like I maybe will get one of the dancers that I really want, and I understand that. Like I understand it from a director's point of view that they have to fit their vision, so I'm like, that's just part of my job and I accept that. And I'm usually pleasantly surprised with like how they can dance and like whatever. And then as a director, like I echo everything that has already been said, and I sometimes just, okay, we can have these three people. I just try to negotiate a couple people if I really want somebody specific, or if I really want us to look further for some one role or something, but it's, but I echo what they said.
Right. Great. Thanks. Yeah. Here's a question from Jane. It has to do with working for smaller engagers, small theater companies. Do you make any kinds of adjustments, either internally or with your own methods or tactics, or your style, when you're negotiating for smaller theater companies? Yes, Rebecca.
I think I'm probably like way gentler negotiating with a smaller company. I think because as Meg said earlier, it's likely with a small company that's more of a personal relationship. So the tone of the conversation is a bit different. And I think that when it comes to budgets, like really looking at the nuts and bolts of a budget of a smaller company, I tend to sort of have more empathy for a smaller company because I also produce my own work. So it just invites a different kind of creativity, a kind of creativity I find really exciting. I'm like, okay, we've got $11 to put on this show. How will we make it work? In the world of when I have been dealing with small companies as presenters, it kind of changes the way I look at things differently. Like, okay, well, you want to buy the show and the weekly fee is this, but you don't have that. So you start looking for value in other places. But that's also included for me. It's rare, but it has happened where I've said, can I see your marketing budget and what the marketing plan is? Because I also get a percentage of the box office. I need to know, like, are you guys on it? How aggressive are you? Oh, you guys have budgeted for 20% houses, but the other presenter I'm talking to budgets for 60% houses. And so that will inform, like the hard side of the conversation. I like sort of looking at the business as the hard side versus the creative as the soft side. And I get weirdly excited about the details on the hard side. So, but yeah, I'm gentler.
Great. Yeah, thanks. Yeah. Anything from either of the other two of you?
I just understand that, like, there's going to be things that I want that I have to let go of because there's just no possible way that they can afford both a dialect coach and an intimacy person, Anna. So I look at the production and think, like, what can I do without,
Mhm.
can I do without a couple chairs? Can I do without like a big set piece or whatever, Yeah.
Yeah, I'd maybe add that there are companies with more and less money in this country. Most of them don't have any money, like practically speaking, and probably I change my I definitely adjust what I'm after, what I'm asking for, what I'm looking at, but mostly I would kind of look more in part at the overall operating budget of a company. What's the big number they're playing with? But then frankly, just looking at my show is usually enough. What does the show need and what have they allotted to it? If you've got $500 in labor for a set, well, you know what that show is. Like, that's the bucket one. That's not the swimming pool one. And you're not going to get $5,000 in a labor line if it starts at 500. So you're going to go swinging things around in an office about what you really need. You're going to kind of approach it separately based on your show's budget. And that might be true even in a very large company. A show might not be working with the same kind of budget that another show in their season is. And that's just a fact of the industry and of their projections and their needs as a company, what they're after. Like, it's not every show is going to come with the same kitty to pull from, even if that company is very large. And I think sometimes we get a little mixed up about what very large really means in Canada. So no one's really very large. Everybody's like, oh my God. So looking at your budget specifically, having relationships with designers that you can say, hey, would you just look at this? Would you just look at this quick for me? Like, is this enough to do a swimming pool? And then they'll say no. Just understanding how money turns into creativity is super useful and not always about the size of the company. Sometimes just about, what you're after and what they can really do.
That's great. Thank you. This next question, we've got time for a couple more, I think, before we draw to a close. But this one is quite interesting. Kind of speaks not so much to what to do once you've got the gig, but how do you get the gig? Do you approach a company that you don't know, and do you ever do cold calls? Basically, is the nature of this question. Do you ever approach a company and say, "I'd like to work with you. I have a specific show idea. I'd like to direct this play." Especially if you don't know what their season is, how do you approach that part of your game as a director? I would consider that part of negotiation. You're trying to get yourself in a position where you are negotiating with somebody. So let's hear from you, Rebecca.
I have no idea. I think, at least in my own career, like I feel like I have kind of tumbled into getting hired to direct by other companies because of the weird self-produced work that I do. So like those relationships have kind of turned into other conversations. I will absolutely cold call though. I don't phone people. Who phones people? My God. But I'll send emails again, in the theme of like, well, the worst they'll say is no, is I'll just send off an email saying, but I've also done this with friends of mine where I'll say, hello, I think mid-career director. I have no idea. I don't know. It's a strange thing to just, that's where you, I guess, want your agent involved. And I'm also, I'm not the director. Like, I don't have a stack of plays next to my bed where I'm like, these are my dream plays that I want to direct, except maybe Noise is Off because it scares the crap out of me. But I have started to, in my I'm just going to send 5 emails on a Tuesday because I'm avoiding other work. What I have started to do is say, I don't have a list of plays, but I think I'm okay at directing comedy. So I'm kind of pitching myself in a genre. That's not to say that I, Rebecca, don't want to, direct a fantastic, heavy drama at some point, but I don't think anyone in the country would think of me first. Because I've now publicly talked about how important chicken puppets are to me. So I pitch myself in genre.
Great, thank you. Yeah,
Hasn't worked so far.
keep trying. Yeah, anybody else?
Yeah, I've done, like, I've cold called, like, not cold call, but like sent emails with the same thing. Like, the worst they could do is not respond to the email, and whatever, like, the seed is is planted, and even if it hasn't, even if it went to their junk mail, who cares? It's out in the universe. So I've done that. Like, I've invited people to my work. I've said, like, hey, I see you're doing this in your season next year. There's no director seemingly attached on to it, like, I'm interested. Or like, hey, I would like to work for your theater as a director. Do you have anything in the season? Those kinds of things. Yeah. So, like, to varying success rates.
Meg, do you have anything to share?
The jobs I've gotten have been through relationships that I've built or had or been somewhere doing. I mean, because I work in 3 disciplines, because I work as a sound designer a lot and as an actor, I think a lot of the jobs that I've gotten as a director have stemmed from those relationships or conversations that were had when I was there doing those jobs. Like, just being around the right time, which is terrible and unuseful to most people probably. But I do think, I know from a designer standpoint and an actor standpoint, writing and saying, this is what I do really well, and I'd love to do it with you, is super useful and highly successful. And even just to enter into a conversation with producers about the skills that you've got and how you got them is wildly useful. As a director, I love hearing from designers or actors that are interested. And as a producer, I know that it's the same, right? Just knowing who's out there and who wants to come and what they're into. And because again, there's just 10 of us, and most of us straddle the line between producing and directing and acting, or designing and directing. And like, we're all doing all the things. So I think being present and saying what you want to do is really great.
As a follow-up, I mean, do you find that when you send those messages out, how are they picked up and how are they received? Like, what's the vibe generally when you're sending those messages out? Do you feel like there's a capacity for receiving those kinds of offers from engagers generally, or is there a range, or what's the feeling of that for you guys?
My experience really has been, it depends on the size of the company. And like, I think you have to keep in mind that, a friend of mine who was an artistic associate for a chunk of time at one point told me that she was getting anywhere from 400 to 700 emails a day. So I think you got to, like, send it out into the universe, let it go, maybe do a follow-up in 3 months, but you have to take nothing personally. Not hearing a response means nothing. Send 2 emails and then send a handwritten card. Who does that anymore? My God, if I got a handwritten card in the mail, I'd probably cast you immediately.
Cue the mail, Rebecca. Now it's like, blah, 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 blah.
I know. Yeah. And then I think you just have to, like, very gently sort of keep at it. I think people are open and interested. It's just whether or not they on a given Tuesday have the capacity to open all their emails or remember that they sent it or that they opened the first one. I mean, I will sometimes, like, I play a game with myself of, like, okay, I set an alarm of, like, well, I'm coming back around to 65 days. Here I go. I'm going to send another email. I hope they don't find me annoying.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, also coming out of COVID, with the number of people who are coming to the theater now, with the way the industry is working in the last 4 or 5 years, it's not like producers are just sitting around eating bonbons, right? They are working so hard to stay afloat, to be there to offer us these jobs, that if you don't hear back it's not because they didn't want to hear from you. It's just that they are in the thick of it. I think 201, I can't imagine there's a company in the country right now that's feeling great. It's a rough time for all performing arts, all of them, dance, music, everybody. And so, yes, write and say what you're into, because we are all, in the end, on the same team, committed to a medium that's in a really rough moment. And knowing that there are people out there that want to contribute and be a part of it is so useful and inspiring for those people who are looking to create jobs for you.
Yeah, it's great. Good. We're going to have one more question here, and I think we're going to start to wrap it up. We've been going for an hour and 15 minutes. And this question is from Justin. It's about bringing or having assistants or associates of your own. Is that something that you ask for? Is it something that's generally supplied when it can be supplied? How does that generally work? Yeah, I saw your hand, Julie. Go ahead.
I always like an assistant because recently I've been more of a director choreographer as opposed to just a choreographer. So because I'm doing the two roles, I like to have an assistant so that they can like take somebody in, take the ensemble in the other room and rehearse the like choreography or whatever, or just like whatever, like be in the other room doing something, and then somebody to bounce ideas off of as well. Like I use everybody. I use my stage manager, I use my musical director, I use everybody, even the props person. Last time I was like, she was like, the act one is too long and you need to do this. And I'm like, okay, great, done. So like I use everybody, but having a right hand, I like to have. Oftentimes, if not all the time, they say there's no budget for an associate or assistant. But recently, like the Citadel, Theatre Calgary, many other A-house theaters have a program. So at least you can find somebody out of the program. If I really need an assistant, sometimes this is getting into like, I have never given money out of my fee, but we've negotiated, because this is different now because the CTA, like directors and choreographers, has changed. But before, I was 100% got my fee was 100% of the directing fee at 50% of my choreography fee. So we always negotiated like the other 50% of that fee could go to an assistant. But now that the CTA says 100% directing fee, 100% choreography fee, I don't know how that conversation is gonna go. But I haven't, because I can use the programs like the Citadel, Theatre Calgary, many others. I've not crossed that bridge yet.
Gotcha. Thank you. Yeah. Anybody else? Yes, Meg.
I've negotiated for an assistant on a show where I did The Miracle Worker at the Playhouse, and we had 2 kids play Helen Keller. And so I made it a part of my hard negotiations to have an assistant who could just be with those kids to make sure that the show was consistent night to night with 2 separate kid companies, basically, which was super useful. And I negotiated for an assistant at a company that didn't have any money for it. And we went hunting for money in education, actually. So I approached the education department to see if they had extra wiggle room for community outreach. We really felt like community outreach would be a super valuable component of the show, like ancillary events and speaker series and stuff that would support the production. And in the end, that's how we funded her work. She did all my prep with me, and then she did all of the community work. It was amazing. I mean, assistant directors pretty typically are wildly underpaid and valued, I would say. And then I've had assistants assigned to me at bigger companies where that's like they have an ongoing program, let's say, where assistants are a part of what they're doing all the time. And assistants are the best. Because it is lonely and it's super nice to look over and be like, oh no. And they say, it's fine. It's great. It really is hard. Yeah. So all those things, I think, again, it's like you look at your piece. What is it that you're really going to need? And then approaching the company with that need is great.
Awesome. Great. Okay. We got one last question. I just want to put this in here because it's really interesting. This is from an anonymous attendee. Thank you for submitting the question. What is your time frame in terms of needing an agreed offer or contract before creative negotiations? This is really interesting. I'm curious to know how often you start work on a show before you have a contract in place. Hand up from Rebecca.
Almost immediately.
Like,
Uh,
like you want your contract before you start work? Is that what you're
oh
saying?
no,
Or
no, the opposite. Of just like I will just I start. It's I don't know. I'm knocking wood. It hasn't bit me in the ass yet, but I can't turn my brain off. Like if I've read the play and the offer's been made and the agent's having the hard conversation, the soft work has already begun.
is that work sort of just internal to you though? Like, are you
No,
getting
not
into?
necessarily. I
Yeah.
have on projects been connected with designers, and then independently we've all gone like, hey, should we have a quick meeting? Knowing that half of like none of us have an offer or like conversation is happening. We'll sign it later. And I think in part, there's there's an act of good faith and trust there that
Mhm.
um, offices are busy. Like if we waited for all the paperwork to be signed and done or whatever, it'd be like, oh my gosh, now production's 3 months away. So I
Yeah.
start.
Okay. Good.
My brain starts right away,
Mhm.
but and I want to be delicate. After COVID, I am a lot less willing to send paperwork or attend meetings without a contract in place.
Mhm.
Um,
Yep.
because contracts evaporated, I just kind of I did
Yep.
get bitten, and I also feel like absolutely companies are extremely busy, and having patience and grace for the turnaround on stuff, absolutely. But at the same time, I yeah, I'm reticent or I'm slow sometimes, depending on my relationship with the company, to submit like a schedule breakdown or like a major production meeting, scope and scale meeting, like things that the company is definitely exercising my talents to move forward in their process. I feel like even just an LOA, even just a letter of agreement that outlines a fee schedule is worth its weight in gold, and doesn't always need to come with payment, although it can, right? It could come with your first third. And I think that's really important, actually. So I personally, yes, my brain goes right away. Like as soon as I get the email saying, do you want to direct Scott Bellis in whatever it is we're directing? I'm directing Scott Bellis in this imaginary world. Right away, I'm imagining, but I would like the LOA before I kind of put anything down. Yeah.
Yeah.
Business.
Yes, I think as creatives, it's almost impossible when you're offered, you start to enter, conversation with an engager about a project, your creative mind starts going immediately, and you can't really turn that off. That's just kind of how we're wired. And my advice is try and get the contract before you start, because I have received emails from people saying, hey, I got offered to direct a show, and I started planning and doing meetings and meeting with designers and da 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 da. And then last week I got an email saying they're pulling the show from the season, and they've put in all this work. And I said, well, you should get a payout from your contract. And they're like, oh, they didn't, I didn't get the contract yet. Once you've completed negotiations for your gig, like once the terms are all set, and you've determined how much you're going to get paid and how much your rental car is going to be and where your hotel is and all that stuff that you need for you, there's a certain amount of time they have to deliver your contract to you. I think it might be 10 working days.
But I gotta
Um,
say, I love the additional piece of the letter of agreement.
Yeah.
Like turn it around quick. Here's the points we agreed on, and maybe even in the letter of agreement saying, in the event that this show gets pulled between the signing of this letter of agreement and the actual hard copy, we mutually agree that I will get a fee of X.
Yeah.
Again, you ask for it. They might say
Yeah.
no, but it might be a great way to cover your ass. Like that's where I'm like, oh my God, that's so exciting. That's a new business thing I'm going to adopt.
Yeah. And just to extend that negotiating power, because often you'll be the first one hired. I would expand that to your designers. So if you have an LOA and you're going into a scope and scale meeting, let's say, but your designers don't have anything in place, then that's not cool. Like the creative team, as the front of the arrow, a friend of mine said, as the front of the arrow, you want to look after them too. So if I've got a contract in place, but my set designer has nothing in place and we're weeks away and we're coming up on prelims, I'm not going to submit any prelims until everybody's got something in writing. That just helps us know. And that's not because I don't trust that company. It's not personal, it's business. It's just about having every little piece organized the same way that they expect us to be professional and reciprocal in our deliverables. To me, contracting and those early payments and the outline of schedule, production, and expectations, all a part of the same thing.
Yeah. Thank you. I think at this point, we're going to draw this to a close. It's been a really, really full 90 minutes.
There's such a good
I see we've
question,
still
though.
got like 33 attendees here, which is fantastic. I
It's
want
a
to
very
thank you
good
all for-
question in the
Yes.
chat.
Yes. Oh, about assistance?
No, how does waiting for the contract work when equity isn't releasing some contracts till casting is complete?
Oh, I think that that's not correct. Like you can have one actor cast and they can have their contract in place before the rest of the cast is even determined.
Also,
Once your terms have been negotiated, the theater must deliver you your contract within a certain amount of time, or at the very least 20 days before rehearsal starts. That's definitely in the CTA. So I'm not sure how it works when you're under the dot and all that kind of thing. But if you have questions for that, relating to the delivery of contracts, please call the office or write to a business rep.
Yeah, but
because
can
they
I
can, yeah,
steer it in a director way, Scott? It was super
sure.
interesting as things have changed. Like 7 years ago, when as cast was a component of contracting and isn't anymore, that is an interesting, I don't really know how to talk about that, but it is an interesting thing. Sometimes you would get a show, Rebecca and Julie are in my show, and I know that Rebecca's going to play so-and-so, but Julie is going to have an as cast contract. So there are sometimes earlier expectations on directors for casting details that it's moved up sometimes. Your understanding of the piece and how you want to cast it basically and populate it and doubling and tripling in a show. Sometimes that has to be done a lot earlier than it used to. And that would pertain to a directing contract and where you're at in your negotiations and the hard copy contracts in place. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
if I can
Yeah.
just, if
Go
I can
ahead. Yeah.
say one thing, I agree with everything that's just been said, and I echo all of it. But also, like, there's a couple theaters that I've worked with at recently that aren't able to get the equity contracts because they don't have their bond in place or something. And because of that, we've just worked on a letter of agreement, and the letter of agreement says the first third comes with this letter, signing of this letter of agreement. And so that way I can start the work, you know?
Yeah. Okay, good. Yeah, that's great. It sounds like a really interesting solution. For those of you who are in the chat right now, Suchita and Rachel, you know, I'm glad you think that LOAs are helpful. When you're coming at this conversation from the perspective of an independent producer, I know that it's sometimes tricky to get everything in place before the contracts can be released to you. If you're having concerns or questions about that, I'll just refer you back to the business reps. That's really their department. There it is from Randy. That's the email you can write to if you have any questions or suggestions in that regard.
But I think writing stuff down, LOAs, black print on your screen, regardless of the timeliness of our association, is super important. Because in the end, you know, you do want to make sure that your services are protected. And so it's not ideal, but having in any size of theater and on a CTA or the dot, like just have it written down somewhere.
I totally agree with that. I think once things are written down, then you have that to refer to when you have questions about how everything's proceeding. Okay, I'm going to wrap it up. Thank you so much to our panelists. Thank you, Meg and Rebecca and Julie. Also, thank you to our equity staff behind the scenes for their support in getting the webinars done. If you have a suggestion for another webinar relating to this, to directing and choreography, or really any idea for a webinar, you can write to communications@caea.com, and they will be happy to take those suggestions into consideration. Thanks for being with us, and take care. We'll see you next time.